Deputy Lawless is first supplementary.
Thanks, Last Concordia. Minister, I want to echo and endorse everything that my colleague Deputy McCulloch has said at the outset, and I think it's a very similar position. I think it is key, and your answer, Minister, has touched on this already a few times. Are these schemes intended solely as job activation measures, or are they recognised as having a social inclusion element, which I think is absolutely essential? And as Deputy McConalogue has alluded to, many of these schemes facilitate individuals who may not be in a position to attract normal gainful employment, who may not be able to contribute in a commercial environment, but can contribute very effectively, very productively, very usefully to their communities. So I think we have two groups of people actually affected by the difficulty in sourcing people for community employment schemes, getting onto two schemes, and the impact, I suppose, that JobPath in particular, and Tourist New and ZTech are having on that space. And we have two groups of people who are losing out. We have the individuals themselves who are denied, in many cases, the opportunity for dignified, worthwhile activity and occupation, which gives them a pride and a reason to get up in the mornings and all the other good things, and mental health and everything else. But we also have the host organisations, be they GA clubs, be they parish councils, be they tidy towns groups, be they local history groups, heritage groups, and they're invariably in community and invariably not profit, and they're coming to us and saying we don't have this stream of assistance that we had, which was beneficial to both the individual that was employed and to the host organisation. And I know there's been conflicts with the two new providers, Tourist New and ZTech, and maybe they have a more commercial focus. I think there are measures that could be introduced to tackle that and let them work more closely together in more collaborative fashion. And I hope you will look at that, Minister.
You made up your 30 seconds.
I did.
Minister, thanks.
We have our ways, Count Carla. Here's the dilemma, Deputy. Because everything that you've said is true, right? There are hundreds, if not thousands, of participants, both in our CE schemes and in our two schemes, that are doing social inclusion activities, and our communities are desperately relying on them. The problem is that my department wasn't established, and CE and TWOs wasn't established to provide social inclusion services. It's an employment activation measure, and it's no different than JobPath, which isn't commercial. It's an employment activation measure. And so the sole purpose in statute for these organisations that are hosting our CE and our two schemes is to give employment experience and opportunities to people so that they can move on to full-time sustainable jobs. The dilemma that we have is that tens of thousands of people who participate in them probably won't ever or don't ever want to get full-time sustainable jobs. But I don't know how to change that, because if I do change it, well, then it's not employment activation, and then it doesn't fall under the remit of the Department of Social Protection and Employment Affairs. But I want to genuinely acknowledge that there are thousands of people on CE schemes that take pride, respect and value in the social inclusive services that they provide, but they're just not employment activation. So we need to square that circle to acknowledge and respect and reward what they're doing, but not under the guise of employment activation, because if we continue to call these schemes employment activation, well, then we have to continue to move people on, which is causing the upset to both the host organisations, the community service organisations and groups, and the people who are doing the work.
Two final supplementaries, Deputy McConalogue and then Deputy Lawless.
Thank you, Laskin Corla. Minister, you would think by listening to you that there is some higher power outside of you as Minister and the Government in this National Parliament that is forcing and requiring how these schemes should operate and tying your hands in relation to them. The reality is that it is within your control as Minister and the Government, indeed this Parliament, to influence and mould these schemes and to shape them in the way that is appropriate. I am very proud of the fact that it was my party that established the CE schemes in the first place, and of the tremendous role that they have gone on to play, and that the people within them contribute on a daily basis to the local communities. We need to acknowledge how it's evolved and what's involved in it now, and we need to ensure that it actually can continue to fulfil that purpose. That requires amending it as appropriate. Yes, absolutely, keeping its job placement and empowerment potential and role, but also recognising that it also has another role where it actually facilitates many people in the community who are not going to go on to other jobs to actually contribute to their community. At the moment, many of those are forced to leave them and then not actually be able to contribute or get a job. You can change that, and we're saying you should change that, and we're saying you should go and look at that again. The other thing, briefly, I would ask you to comment on, Minister, is for those supervisors who were in full-time jobs, who were managing these CE schemes over the years, can you give us an update, please, in relation to the position with regard to the 2008 Labour Court recommendation, which required that they actually be provided with pensions, and that's something that the Government has yet to follow through on.
Deputy Lawless.
Thanks, that's Concordia. Minister, I'm going to put you a number of changes which I think you may be able to make, and the first one is a realignment, because you've mentioned that the difficulty with the job activation vis-à-vis social inclusion is a problem. I know Minister Ring took his first question time in 7 months yesterday. Maybe his Department of Community and Rural Affairs could assist in this, and I believe historically there was, I suppose, a cross-departmental approach to these schemes, and maybe sometimes things move from one to another, but perhaps we could recategorise at least part of the scheme, and that may help with that. I think also the ability to do an assessment up front when somebody is referred, say, to JobPath, that when they go in their first week, rather than spending 12 months going through a programme which may not be suitable for them, it may be eminently suitable for many individuals, but there are some who may not be a good match, that be identified in the first week or the first 2 weeks, and they should be sent back to TUS if that's more appropriate. And I understand from making contact that the host, Tourist NUA and CTEC, would be happy to actually facilitate that. Also, if somebody could remain on a community employment scheme, if somebody is actually out there working in the local GA hall, whatever it is, and they're required to do that 3 days a week or 4 days a week, whatever it is, but they're actually only required through JobPath to be available for interview prep for one 30-minute session, for something else, a different session the next week. There's no need for them to sit at home for 4.5 days of that week when they could be back in the GA hall, doing whatever they're supposed to be doing. So I think allowing somebody to remain on the CE scheme whilst in JobPath, where that's not hindering their efforts in the JobPath scheme, would be very welcome. The rules around eligibility, the rules around continuation, especially for older people where there are greater complexities in re-entering the job market in terms of their participation. And the rules around the barrier to re-entry if somebody comes off a JobPath, that they are not prohibited from going straight back into a CE scheme if that option is open to them. I think there are some immediate changes that could be made and would be very welcome. And as I say again, the categorisation, if there's an issue, I'm sure that can be solved. And if they need to be called social inclusion, let's call them that.
Minister,
if they need to go to Department of Community Affairs, let's do it.
Minister.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. First of all, can I tell you that the JobPath people, as in Tourist NUA and CTEC, don't pick their candidates, we do. So we pick and select the candidates, and we only pick people that are suitable for JobPath. So it isn't a case of that, somebody has sat down in an interview office and said that they want to do CE, and we'll say, no, you can't, we're sending you to JobPath. We only send people to JobPath who are jobs ready and need help on a one-to-one basis that might aid them getting a full-time sustainable job. Deputy McConnell, here's your problem. You do take the credit for setting up the CE scheme because Fianna Fáil was in power for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And I give you that credit. The problem is that when you established it, you established it as an employment activation measure, which is why it sits neatly in the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection. What we don't do in this department is provide employment, or we provide social inclusion measures. And so the difficulty with trying to do what I wanted to do before Christmas is that when I separate all of the people on all of the schemes, it doesn't fit neatly into that a host company in Donegal is doing only social inclusion and a host company in Letterkenny is doing entirely work experience and activation, so we could separate them, because that's not the reality. The reality is that on every single scheme we have people who are doing social inclusion measures and we have people who are doing employment activation and training measures. So how do you have different rules for the same people who are on the same schemes? It isn't possible. And then you bring it back to the higher power that I'm deemed by, which is what the Department of Social Protection and Employment Affairs is statutorily responsible for, is the welfare of people who are required to be looked after by the state and employment activation. Under nowhere does it say that I'm responsible for providing services to communities. And so I can't separate them out, even if it was physically possible for me to do it, because it wouldn't be within the remit of my department. So what I'm trying to do is to reflect the reality of the fact that some people who are involved in TUS and CE most likely won't ever work again because of either their age in full-time employment or for other difficulties that they might have. And I'm trying to be flexible with the terms of these CE schemes to allow and to respect the contribution that these people are making to their communities, while still remaining under the remit of my own department, which I'm legally obliged to do.
Question number